Hi, I'm Grant Diggles with Health Professionals Alliance and your host of the Real Docs Show, where we talk with real doctors, we talk about real topics, and we spotlight real solutions. If you're an independent practice in medical or dental, HPA has a message for you. Don't get consolidated. Instead, join the HPA family with other independent practices and groups across the country in both medical and dental. Protect your independence, control your patient care, thrive in the market, and build your wealth. For more information about how to be a part of this exciting movement, you're welcome to visit www.hpamembers.com. As always, we invite our listeners to subscribe to the channel to get the most exciting episodes that are coming out. And this particular episode is a really interesting one. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Daniel Paull, based out of Colorado Springs, an orthopedic surgeon that represents his own practice, Easy Orthopedics. Check out his website at easyorthopedics.com. The title of our show today is Direct Specialty Care, How a Cash-Only Orthopod Thrives on His Own Terms. So I'm really excited about this episode today because the model that we're going to introduce you to is so novel that it kind of isn't novel, because it goes back to how medicine and healthcare was decades ago. And we're going to jump into understanding what exactly that means with our guest. So I'd like to introduce to you my guest today, Dr. Daniel Paull. Dr. Paull, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Grant. Thanks for having me on your show.
I want to get into some information about kind of why you did the practice, set up the way you did it, what it looks like, how it works. But before we get into that, do you want to share a little bit about yourself with the audience? Let's get started with that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training, general orthopedic surgeon. And I guess I have this kind of unique business model. And I'll start by saying that I never imagined that I would be doing this business. It was not in the cards. It is not what I planned. I'm really glad I did. I think it's the best career move that I've ever made, and I'm early on in my career. The genesis of it, I feel like it's a story I have to tell because it's a little, it was kind of unplanned in a certain sense. So nobody starts a business because things are good. You start a business because things aren't good or there's a problem. There's no one out there that says, hey, everything's going really well, I'm just going to break free and start my own business. That's just generally not how it happens. Yep. So the origin story for me is, I went to full year, five-year orthopedic surgery residency. I finished that. I passed my written boards, and then I started a fellowship in hand surgery. And that's usually 1 year of extra training. So I was just planning on doing hand surgery. And then something happened about halfway through that. One was I was looking for a job out in Colorado, where my wife is from. So at this point, I've been dragging her all over the country, Florida, Ohio, all over the place. And I'm like, we're going to go back to Colorado where your parents are. And plus, it's really beautiful out here anyways. It's not, it's a desirable place to live, in my opinion, at least. And I'm looking for a job and I can't find one. Or if I find them, they're pretty bad. They're like, hey, take our entire level 3 call for the whole practice 24/7, or here's a 4-month guarantee. For those not familiar, it guarantees how much they pay you while, just like a salary while you build your practice. The standard's 2 years, but they were offering 4 months. So, it was pretty bad. And then I interviewed for a job out in Connecticut, and not only was it a low ball, it's like, I'm just listening to this senior orthopedic surgeon, senior partner, just basically tell me how much money he used to make in the early 90s. And this guy's miserable, and all his partners are miserable. And I talked to a junior partner, he's miserable. And it was kind of like, well, like, what am I doing? And, I was in that fellowship, and, I was pretty unhappy there. It wasn't really I don't want to go into details, but it wasn't a very positive educational experience, at least for me at that time. So those things are going on, and I'm unhappy, and I'm in the middle of this existential crisis. And I just said, screw this. So, I was kind of like in a transitional moment, and I I had a friend who started a house call practice doing kind of internal medicine down in Miami, Florida. And that's where I went to medical school. And so I talked to him, and like, not only is this guy happier than anybody I know, he's doing better financially. So I'm like, there's got to be something here. So it was this moment of just kind of desperation, existential crisis, unhappiness just swirled together. And so I quit my fellowship, which is kind of a rare thing to do. They're only a year long. So to quit halfway through is not a normal thing to do. And I broke my lease, and I just moved out to Colorado, like into my in-laws' basement. And, I'm not really working, or I'm trying, and I'm just kind of figuring this model out. Like, okay, I've seen people do it for other specialties. Like, what does this look like for orthopedics? And I knew I couldn't take insurance because it's impossible. I would be out of business. I cannot afford that overhead. I don't like the way they basically control you in what you do. So I knew that was just not an option. So it was like, how do I build out this practice that doesn't take insurance? And I do general orthopedics now too. Doesn't mean I operate on everything, but I certainly see everything. And that was kind of the genesis of it. And it started out mobile, because I didn't have an office, and I would just go to see people at their houses, which I still do. And now I see people at other doctors' offices and things like that. So it's certainly evolved. And it's been about 3.5 years now, but that's kind of how it started. So it kind of started from a place of desperation. I think this can work. Let's not think too much about it and just do it and kind of see what happened, because that's the position that I was in.
So again, I want to reiterate here, you came to Colorado Springs, you moved into your in-laws' basement, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great way. So that's a great way to keep your overhead down for starters, and it puts you on your toes. It's like, okay, I've got my expenses pretty low. I don't have much overhead. That gives me a lot of space to be creative and figure out what I want to do. And then my question for you is, did you start doing, we'll call them house calls, right? Did you start doing house calls? Because it's like, I'm just going to get started doing this to start generating some money. And then did it organically kind of turn into what Easy Orthopedics is today? Was when you started doing the house calls, was that like, I know this is the direction I want to go. I want to do house calls. I want to be on my own, or was it my overhead's low? I don't know what I want to do. So I'm just going to kick off with this concept to start to buy myself some time and bring some money in. And then kind of organically, it started evolving into what it is today. Like, was this planned, I guess, is my question.
I never planned on getting an office, so I was following copying the model of my colleague. So he was still doing that, and so I knew it was just had to be mobile. If you're talking about low overhead startup, a mobile practice. You basically get malpractice and your website, a few other things, and some supplies, and you're ready to go. So I didn't know. I didn't really plan that far ahead. And then it was a lot of figuring out, like, where do I get there's so many things that I had to figure out. As far as like where to get patients, how to do this, how to do that, where do you get imaging, where do you do surgery? All those were problems that needed to be solved. The nice thing about the model is it's extremely durable. So I think I estimate my overhead at probably about $2,000 a month, which most of that's malpractice.
Wow.
And the practice is just me and my wife, right? So, and since I don't take insurance, I've lowered the costs on all the other things that come with insurance, like an expensive EMR, all the staffing, billing, housing all the staff, and like all the nonsense. So, you can only see a couple of patients a week, and really you're breaking even. So if you have days where you don't see anybody or nothing much is going on, because this is a low volume, low overhead practice. You're totally fine. I don't think people appreciate that as much. They think that you need to have a giant practice with that's like a 10,000 square foot building with like rows of cubicles and need to be crushing 50 people a day and having full operative days. But at the end of the day, you're not keeping that much money because it's all going to your overhead costs and you're all run down. And not more than that, the quality of care suffers because you may be a really, really good physician and doctor and surgeon, but you're having 7 minutes with a patient. So how good of a job can you really do? If the person has one problem, fine. But what if they have like 4 or 5 problems? Like, what do you do with that? You ignore them because you have to, because that is only what you can do in the allotted time. And all these providers are forced into this model, which I think that medicine to get quality medicine, I think is necessarily time-based. So
Mm.
I'm not saying to be slow or anything like that. I'm just saying that, people take time to see and to do a good job. So like my appointments are booked for an hour. The
Wow.
model's different.
Wow. And then, of course, now I do want to jump into how the practice works, but before
Sure.
we do that, we're recording this right now, and your background's blurred out, but you're at home, right? So you're in your office.
Yeah, I'm in my office. My background's blurred. If it was unblurred, you could see tons of toys that were on the ground. We usually have them cleaned up, but the kids got here before I could start, so there's stuff. But no, I'm at home, and my wife works with me, and she's at home, so we get to spend like tons of time with our family. And if nothing's going on, like
Yeah.
the other day, not a lot was going on. We went on a bike ride in the morning, and in the middle of the day. That's the kind of thing that you can do with this model.
Yeah, and I wanted to, before we got into the practice, I wanted to point that out because there is definitely, aside from what you've been saying on the fact that the overhead's low and things like that, the ability for you to control your schedule. You're probably writing off a part of your practice because your office is at home. And so you get some of those tax advantages there. But then there's the quality of time. And one of the things we see with a lot of our doctors that are members in HPA is that they are working really hard. And time is one of the most valuable commodities that they continue to fight to try to have. But for all the reasons that you're saying, they are constantly at the office, and it is a numbers game. And so I wanted to bring the fact that you're recording this at home. The background is blurred. There's toys on the ground behind you, which I think is a real testament to the power of what your model is talking about. Like, you are in control of your life, and the quality time and being present to your family is something that I feel like healthcare professionals are always fighting for. And you built it right into your model, which I think is just brilliant, to be honest with you. So I wanted to make sure that we covered that in this show, because you're the only doctor I've talked to so far in our show that has done it from home, because you can. And that's a beautiful aspect to the practice. So let's get into the practice, though. So my first question for you is, what does a typical day in your practice look like?
Oh man, so there's not, I don't know if there is a typical day. I mean, like I said, it's a low volume, low overhead model. So some days I'm rolling around town, see 5 or 6 people, and that will be, I usually book the appointments to start, unless there's a good reason to. I start at 10, sometimes 8, but I'll kind of see people whenever. And then maybe I'll do a house call, and I'll bounce to an office of the family med doc or a chiropractor. I'll see a couple people there, bounce to another office, come home for lunch, hang out for an hour or two, go out and do one more, come back, answer any emails or anything like that. And that's some days. The occasional surgery in a procedure room. I'm not operating as much as I'm used to, so I tend to pick cases that I know I can do a really good job on and that I think are appropriate. So that'll happen. Some days I'm doing medical legal work, which I would recommend to anybody who can do. Or some days I'm doing nothing. I mean, there's days where I have, lunch meetings with our providers, trying to, referral sources. I'll have a day where I see a patient or two and just have a lunch in the middle and tons of free time. Or I have a day where I see nobody. And then like the other day, I just went bike riding with my family in the middle of the day. So to speak to your point earlier, you can't put a price on the time that you get back. I'm still working, and obviously, I feel like I'm doing well, especially for the amount of hours that I put in. But I have far more autonomy and far more free time than probably any other type of doctor that you'll encounter. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. I mean, I can go away a lot. I do. I don't have to check with anybody. My wife schedules for me. So if she wants us to do something on a Thursday, she'll block off that Thursday, and then that's what it is. So I'm so used to it now that I kind of forget about it, but I feel like I'm on continuous vacation for the past 3-something years. And this is not because I'm not trying to not work hard. It's just what I was used to, of just the grind and then just the continuous flow of stuff, barely having time to eat lunch or sit down. Like, that was my baseline, and I guess still is. So working what I'm doing now, which is probably, I don't know, 10 to 15 hours of patient care a week at this point, really doesn't feel much like working at all. I mean, then there's other things to work on the business. We're always improving our system processes. how we approach problems. There's the social media aspect of it, which I do LinkedIn and YouTube. I find to be good fits for myself. So there's other little things. But every patient has my phone number. They really don't call me that often. It's pretty rare.
Like your personal phone number, your personal cell.
Well,
okay.
I've got a Google.
Imagine that.
But it saves. It's more efficient that way, right? Because if they have a question, when are they gonna? So if a patient in a normal practice has a question, right? What are they gonna do? They're gonna call the front desk. The front desk is gonna pick up the phone. They're gonna transfer it to the medical assistant. And at any point, this phone call may be dropped, right? Medical assistant gets the message.
Yep.
They write it down. They give it to the doc. Doc has to answer it anyways. Now it's been filtered a few times. Gives back to the medical assistant, and then they call the patient. I don't need to really explain why that's a terrible way of doing things. But what's the point? The doc still answers the question anyways. It's just filtered through 5 people. The message get lost. And if you look at bad reviews of most practices, they're all communication based. So, if it's a scheduling issue, they call my wife. If it's a medical issue, they call me, or they text me too. And sometimes people are texters, and that's fine. But it's just a much more efficient way of answering their questions, and you're going to do it anyway. So, my phone shuts off in the middle of the night, and I let them know that too. And but they just don't get that many calls. And when I do, they're reasonable and they're good questions. Like the other day, I was treating a 16-year-old kid with a central slip finger injury, which if you don't treat it appropriately, will get kind of a deformed finger. And we caught it and splinted him appropriately. And his football coach wants him to take the splint off and go play football, or like have somebody wrap it. And the mom didn't want to do that. And I was like, absolutely. I'm like, I strongly recommend against that. But you can have those conversations immediately, which I think is more efficient.
Yeah. So that was one of the questions. So you work in conjunction with your wife. So this is a family practice. You give a lot of time to patients. So that was one question. Okay, scheduling is handled by your wife, because we're going to talk a little bit more about the infrastructure of the practice. But I was thinking about this before the show, as from our last phone call, and it kind of feels. I said in the beginning of the show, it's like this is a really novel practice, but kind of not novel in the fact that it kind of reminds me of when I was a kid and watching like Little House on the Prairie. And it's like, one of the kids are sick and they send for the doctor, and then the doctor comes to them, right? Instead of, our current healthcare system, it's like, oh, we're sick. I'm not sure what to do. Oh, the doctor's not available. They can't get me in, and except for three weeks from now. And so now I'm going to go to the ER, and, I'm going to drum up a $2,000+ bill, or, and then I'm at the ER all day, or at least I think it's got to be a minimum of 3 hours. I'm not sure what the average ER stay is, but it's atrocious. I recently went through it myself, and it was 12 hours just to get an MRI for my grandmother. Right. So it kind of goes, you're like it is novel, but you're going back to like what healthcare used to be. And all the things you said so far is like, you're spending more time with the patients. Your overhead is down. You're giving better care. You're more available. Like it's so simple that it's kind of ridiculous. But so let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure of the practice. So you mentioned that sometimes you go to offices. So what does that mean if you're basically running your business out of your home, but you're still going to offices? Do you have relationships with other doctors at offices? Like, how does that work for you?
Gotcha. So this kind of developed organically. So, I'm a traveling orthopedic surgeon, right? Which is, as far as I know, I'm really the only one who does that. I have everything with me to cast, splint, which I do sometimes, injections, ultrasound, portable ultrasound, any sort of wound care. So basically, mostly anything you would do in an office. So what I found was that I would start seeing people, referrals from people in the community who appreciated what I did, who are also in that cash world. We're talking direct primary care doctors or chiropractors as well. And they'd be like, hey, can you see this guy? I'd be like, well, he's at my office Tuesday at 10. Can you come at that point? And I was like, sure. So it kind of developed organically, where I would just come to the office and see their patients at their office and treat them. And they don't charge me for that because I'm a value add while I'm there. So for the chiropractor, he doesn't have to send this guy out into the world worrying that he's not going to come back, but they're treating his spine. He's got shoulder pain. I come there, take care of his shoulder pain, leave the spine alone unless they want me to look at it. So that's kind of how it developed. And over time, I've had a few places, so a few different offices where I go. So sometimes I'll put my own patients there too, which also, if they seeing them inside of medical office, then if hey, do you need a primary care doctor? Well, we're in one. So, it works both ways. And like, I'm not at any one place for a particularly long amount of time. So it's not like I'm really dominating any resources. I don't use their front office staff. I don't use any of their forums. I'm not using their phone. I'm literally just using a room. I take my own sharps with me.
Wow.
So I'm literally just using a room. And there's people that understand my value in the community and they like that I do that. And so it works out kind of nicely. So I do a combination of both house calls and office calls, although the offices are not mine.
So you are, I mean, you're about as portable as you can be. So, and completely autonomous, and you create a ton of value add for the people that work with you. So the people that do work with you, as you mentioned, are like direct patient care, DPCs, chiropractors. Are the majority of these people that you work with and refer back and forth to also a cash-based model? Or are you equally yoked in that way, or does it matter?
They're usually substantially in the cash-based model. And look, cash can mean a bunch of different things. I take it to mean not dealing or not interfacing with insurance companies. I don't have the resources to do that. I don't want to do that. I'll fail. So that also, by seeing cash pay patients who just pay me at the time of service, I'll also do personal injury stuff as well. And that means I need to interact with a lawyer, which for me is fine. And I might not get paid for 1 to 2 years, but I don't have to interact with an insurance company. So that surprisingly functions with this model. And I didn't start out to do that. But that also, but a lot of these people, they get really injured in these car accidents. They need someone to take care of them. Most providers don't want to deal with car accident stuff, so they send them around. And I found that I'm a good fit for that because I, deal with most of the musculoskeletal system. So they'll do that and they'll do cash similar to me. They're really not dealing a ton in insurance. Or if they are, it's not, they could live without it if they had to. It's not one of these practices that's 100%. For me to go into a standard primary care doc's office, it's like, it's not very compatible. Direct primary care is.
Okay. Yeah. Cause they understand the model, the cash base, and the expectation, even with the patients, is understood before you even show up for the most part, right? Because they know that they're paying cash for the services they get. And so there's no surprises on the lack of insurance side of things. Am I guessing that pretty closely?
Oh yeah, we certainly vet the patient before we see them to make sure that they know where that if they have personal injury, that we can see them through that, or if it's cash, that it's cash, and that we're not taking their insurance or submitting it. We can generate a super bill for them to submit it, and we're happy to do that. But when people book with us, they know that's part of the process. So I've had it happen once or twice where I've gotten there and then they've been like, I need you to take my insurance. And I go, I feel bad because it's a miscommunication. And it's to the point where I've driven out to go see someone. They get requested I do that and I pack my stuff up and I leave. It's just not worth the headache. And I feel bad about that because that was a miscommunication on our part. But that has happened once or twice. And I just, I would rather be poor than deal with insurance companies. Seriously.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're poor. So, no. I mean, you may not be driving around in a Ferrari, but that's one of the things that I think a lot of doctors struggle with, certainly ones that I've talked about, especially with like direct patient care on the PCP side is, the question that they usually ask is like, well, if I don't take insurance, how do I make money? It's like I'm so reliant on the infrastructure of insurance and the billing infrastructure. Like that's what I know. That's probably what I stepped into out of school. And like it requires a pretty big paradigm shift to say, I think people just assume I'm going to take a huge pay cut if I don't take insurance. Right. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. You segued us into this next question really well. You are cash only, so you don't take insurance. You've clearly communicated that. So my question is if you're taking cash, how do you do that? Like in a typical encounter with a patient, you're cash only. Like how does that work in your particular model?
It's really pretty easy. I mean, I have a card reader, so if they want to use card, they insert it in, and that's it. There's no revenue cycle management. There's the cycle, card in the machine, done. Or sometimes they'll pay me in actual cash, so I'll deposit that in the bank. Or rarely check. If I'm doing a house call and they have a nice house, I'm like, all right, I'll take a check. That's fine. But
Okay, fair enough.
I try not to do that. Or Venmo. I'll do Venmo too. I mean, this is like paying for anything else. They can use their HSA if they want. Can run their HSA card. It's really pretty simple as far as taking cash. If it's a surgery, I do require a $1,500 deposit, because I've found that if you don't do that, you end up spending all this time scheduling something, and then somebody cancels on you, and it just creates a lot of headaches. So, because the procedure room or surgery center has to get ready for all that and plan. So, I won't even schedule them until they've paid that deposit. That's an important
aspect to know. That's a good one to know. So I'm glad you said that.
And you figure all these things out because that's, it happens to you, right? Like, you schedule someone, they reschedule it, and then they cancel it. And then you're like, okay, well, I wasted a bunch of time. How do we not waste time like that again? Or we found that, if somebody calls to schedule an appointment and they call more than 2 times the schedule, the probability of them canceling day of or before is very high. So like, somebody calls once, like, reasonable. Someone calls twice, like, okay, they need to ask someone some questions and call back, reasonable. But if they call a third time, then they're not sure if they really want to do it. And if they're scheduling it, it's probably just to be like, well, let's schedule it. And then if we need to cancel it, we'll cancel it. So we've started doing is, if somebody calls 3 or more times to make an appointment, we make them pay in advance. Just because we've had the problems before where, I do work before the appointment too, and like look at their imaging, create a plan, and before I see them, and then it's like morning of they cancel it because they were maybe going to cancel anyways. So those are little things that
interesting.
You figure out based on getting, I don't want to call it really burned, but just slightly burned, and you're like, okay, we'll change our systems.
Okay, so let's talk about your infrastructure a little bit more so we talked about schedule, and we talked about cash and things like that. One of the things you mentioned as well is you have a very simple EMR process. So how do you manage patient information? What do you use basically to keep your EMR as light duty as possible, keeping your overhead down? Of course, we know EMRs, if you go with more traditional ones, they can add up and be very expensive to any practice. The implementation fees, and then of course the monthly fees for maintaining. So your overhead's very low. You figured out how to do it. So how do you manage patient information, and what kind of EMR are you basically utilizing right now to kind of keep those things organized?
Right. So most EMRs are very expensive because they're essentially billing machines. Billing machines 1, 2, and 3, medical, legal 4, patient note taking 5 or lower, somewhere down the line. They're billing. It's all about billing. So they're expensive. They have to pay to rent the CPT codes from the AMA, which is how the AMA makes a lot of its money. You didn't know that. It's from leasing out these CPT codes. And they're janky. They're cumbersome. They're not meant for note taking. The note sometimes could be a perfectly billable note with no text in it at all, and you have no idea what's going on. So obviously I don't take insurance, so I don't need all that kind of stuff. So what I use is a HIPAA compliant Google Drive through Google Workspace. You sign a business agreement. It makes everything HIPAA compliant under the Google flag. So, the email sending, Drive records and everything. And basically what I've done is created a bunch of templated Word documents, and then I download them as PDF and re-upload them. So I generate all these PDFs of notes. I do that for orders and anything else, or any sort of records. So it's safe, it's compliant, it's backed up, not only on the cloud, but also they have something called the vault. So like extra backed up. There's no personal files on my computer, and I can look at it from my phone or look someone's chart up, and I can send things out super easy. So that's what I do. Now, if you're a direct primary care doctor, you may need a little more with medication ordering. And there's certainly EMRs that are built for that too, which would be better than what I'm using for that purpose. Like Atlas is one of them, which I think maybe is $300 a month for you have to look that up, but it's around that. Mine costs $18 per user per month. I have 2 users, $36 a month. That's it. But for me, I'm not doing continuous care. It's kind of these episodic care episodes. So this EMR has worked really, really great for me. And I if I'm in somebody's house and I'm doing, let's say I'm giving a hip injection on on a female and I'm the only one there, obviously I need to be careful. So I do record those aspects of it, and they sign a release. And then I can upload that onto the cloud as well. So I mean, I just make sure that I'm very, very careful with things like that.
Safely managing patient files and things like that. I think it's kind of like you took Little House on the Prairie and you used innovation and 2022 technology and married these two ecosystems together to create what you've created. And so the next question I have is, and I'm sure this is one that a lot of listeners are going to probably want to hear, is like, okay, so you've got this light duty practice. It's very low overhead. So, money is definitely a concern. So the question is how do you continue to grow your practice? Like, how are you finding referrals? Obviously, you've kind of mentioned, okay, there's some cross referrals, right, from the offices that you go to. But in general, like finding new patients and keeping the machine running, like what kind of things do you do now to continue to grow the practice and keep business coming in?
Sure. So, I mean, there's different ways to go about it. The way that I went about it is I really spent $0 on marketing. So I don't spend anything on marketing, but I did a lot of networking. So I really met a lot of people in the community, go to a lot of lunch meetings, a lot of that, especially in the beginning when I wasn't as busy. I was meeting all sorts of people, basically anyone who'd want to talk to me. Now it's more selective. And then over time, we see where referrals come from. So I'm like, okay, this type of provider usually gives a lot of referrals. Like this one doesn't. We've created lists of like, okay, well, this guy's giving me a lot of referrals. Well, I'm going to spend more time talking to this guy, take him out to lunch or whatnot and make sure I maintain that relationship. Well, this provider is giving me one referral over the course of 4 years. Like, I'm not going to spend time, doing the same activities with that provider. Because what I've learned is some people will refer and some people just won't. I find those that are in the world of musculoskeletal injury and cash stuff usually do. If they're more in the holistic area, then not really so much, which is fine.
Okay.
A holistic patient doesn't necessarily want to see me, so these are things you figure out. So that's one way with providers. And then also word of mouth. As the more good work I do, the more that gets out there and people tell their friends. Search engine optimization. People find me online. That's basically the way I do it. It's slower than marketing, paying for marketing and doing that. But I think the word of mouth marketing it's free and it's the best you can get. It just takes a lot longer to build. So if you have the patience to sustain it for a while, I think that's the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to point out something to the listeners that is kind of a cool testimonial that you have on your website. And so I just want to show this again real quick. I would invite the listeners to go to Dr. Paull's website and go to easyorthopedics.com. If you scroll down on the homepage, there's actually a video testimonial from a patient that basically contacted you and you were there the next day to help him basically handle the injury that he had from the motorcycle accident and saved him a gob of time, didn't have to go to the ER, saved him a ton of money, and he got really good service from you. And so I want to encourage the listeners, if you are listening to this, so just go check it out, go to his homepage and check it out. So one of the other things that I want to talk with you about today too, is you're pretty active on LinkedIn. You've put up a lot of comments in LinkedIn about your distaste with corporate medicine and doctors being acquired by private equity groups or being acquired by hospitals and kind of falling into that trap. So I'm giving you a loaded question here that I could probably answer for you, but the show's not about me. So my question is, do you think that your model is better than our current healthcare system? And why or why not do you think it's better?
I do think it's better for the majority of patients. I think, like I said, medicine is a time-based thing, and my model provides with more time and quicker access. Mm-hmm. I feel like that I can do a better job, or any provider could do a better job in that arena. Now, certainly my model is not fully built out, so there's certain things in the system that I can't do that you would need to go to the hospital for. Like if you break your femur, or I don't do spine surgery, or that model has everything in it right now. And as we build more of this direct care model, we're adding pieces and we're adding more pieces. So right now it can't cover everything, but it can cover a lot and do pretty good. So that's just kind of, you never start with perfect solutions. You start with okay solutions and you kind of make them better. So I feel like for most things, I'm a much better option than what's out there. Not because I'm a better doctor than any of the doctors in the system. It's just because I've created a model that allows me to spend more time with the patients, and I feel do a better job than anyone would be able to do in 5 or 6 minutes.
So my last question for you before we wrap up the show, is there anything that you would like to say to the listeners, especially the professional side of our listeners, the other doctors who are going to be listening to this show? Is there any last words you would want to say to them with your model in consideration of where the healthcare system is now?
Gotcha. So speaking directly to the docs that are listening, it's, one question is like, well, can you make money doing this model? But I think you'll find that, let's say for direct primary care, that a fully built out direct primary care doctor makes a lot more than a primary care doctor in the system. And I believe that to be true with the other specialties as well. You certainly don't start that way, and it takes a long time to build it out. But that the finances are there. So if you're sitting there and you're in this job and it's miserable, and the only thing that's going to happen is over time you're going to get paid less as reimbursements go down and overhead goes up, and you have no autonomy. That if it's time to make a change, that I think this is a really good model that, at least for primary care, is tried and true. For specialty care, we're still figuring it out, but I can say that for me it works. But if you never make the jump and just do it, then you'll be stuck in that miserable existence for forever. So the first step is really just to get your personal finances in order. If you've got multiple houses and expensive cars, and you got to downsize, you got to get all that under control so you're not salary addicted. Yep. You save up some money, and once you feel like you could go for a while without taking a paycheck, and you've downsized, which hopefully you're able to do, then you can really start getting the freedom to make moves. But if you have a massive salary and you need every bit of that salary, you'll never be able to do anything. You'll be stuck there. You've golden handcuffed yourself. So first step number 1, get out of the golden handcuffs. It'll give you some movement, and then you can start thinking about making a move. Because with any business or anything you start, you don't make money in the beginning, but the payoff is also immediate in the sense that you're immediately happier because you've escaped Shawshank, which is really what it is. So that the payoff does come actually immediately, at least emotionally.
Well, I think that's a very powerful message right there, and I think you're 100% correct. If you're a slave to your salary, you're a slave to your lifestyle. Let's put it that way. Then you are. Golden handcuffs is a great way to say it. And I do want to encourage everybody. Again, go to Dr. Paull's website at easyorthopedics.com and check out his website. And have a wonderful day. I know you're going to do some fun stuff this weekend because you're going to have time to do it, right? All right, buddy. Well, I appreciate it very much. And that concludes our show for today, The Real Doc Show, where we talk with real doctors. We talk about real topics and we spotlight real solutions. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day, Dr. Paull.
Thanks for having me, Grant.